this video, we will unpack an important subject related to caring and providing necessary resources for vulnerable populations. People First language was written into law in 1990 in the Americans with Disabilities Act. But what is it exactly? People First language is a way of communicating that respects the person and recognizes the individual is not the sum of their disability. For instance, we use a person with an intellectual disability or person with a mental health concern. When referencing a person with a disability, you should always be mindful of your words. As you have learned, history uses the labeling of disabilities to dehumanize individuals or make them seem less than those without a disability. Also, it is not acceptable to use the words mental retardation. Rosa's Law was signed into law in 2010 and removed all terms referencing mentally retarded or mental retardation from federal health, education, and labor policy. All laws and policies now utilize People First language by referencing individuals with intellectual disabilities. However, not all individuals choose to be recognized by People First language. Instead, they often prefer Identity First language. A way to understand this is the comparison to how a person with an illness describes themselves. I have diabetes is significantly different than I am diabetic. A good way to underscore the difference is to understand that Identity First language embraces the trait rather than separating it or making the difference feel negative. Individuals are proud of their difference. For instance, many individuals with deafness belong to the deaf community. This may also be true of individuals in the autism community. They may use I am autistic rather than saying I have autism. When determining whether to use People First or Identity First language, it is best practice to research which one is preferred. You should review the various advocacy communities, social media, websites, and outreach collateral in your area to determine which language they prefer. You can also contact the advocacy group and ask. Also, the National Institute of Health recommends using People First language when writing about children and using a mix of People First and Identity First language when writing about adults or autistic individuals generally. Best rule of thumb, when you are unsure of which language to use, it is always best to simply ask. This shows that you are being respectful and allowing the individual to determine what is important to them. In a perfect world, humankind is mindful of the world around us and the challenges some of our neighbors navigate daily. Unfortunately, the world is far from perfect. We will be looking at how to engage individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities, IDD, as well as civic groups. An inclusive environmental meeting is more than just putting a group of people together. Meetings between civic leaders and IDD disability groups have not been effective to date. Most IDD self-advocate groups feel they are not being heard by civic groups or elected officials. Many elected officials feel they met with IDD disability groups, so what more is needed? Is it possible that ableism is a factor? A study done in 2020 found 3 issues for engagement. 1. Social stigma and ableism are obstacles to civic participation for people with disabilities. 2. Lack of intentional overlap of civic engagement and disability rights ecosystems impede opportunities for shared learning, collaboration, and equitable, effective allyship. And 3. Leaders of civic engagement organizations and movements recognize the need to include disability rights in their work, but the realities of civic participation for people with disabilities suggest that this recognition is not translated into practice. Ableism is a discrimination or social prejudice against people with disabilities. Many people are not even aware they are doing this. IDD self-advocacy groups can tell you they have experienced and felt it. Ableism can take the form of ideas, assumptions, stereotypes, attitudes, practices, or physical barriers in the environment. Once you know what ableism is, it is easier to recognize it. You may have ableism beliefs and don't know it. To further prevent ableism, you should also use people-first language when engaging with individuals. Civic involvement is an essential element in the democratic process of government. For people with intellectual disabilities, this is not possible as they face systemic barriers and challenges to exercising their rights and engaging in civic forums. Lack of accessibility, lack of simple language or translators, lack of small or low stimulating environment, and other factors at civic events cause individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to feel left out and misunderstood, which leads to underrepresentation across all levels of U.S. government and civic life. So what can you do to remove these barriers and engage individuals with IDD and civic events? It is important that you establish relationships with leaders who have disabilities and/or disability rights groups within your area to use as focus groups or sounding board for policies and ideas. You should use these relationships to learn and share knowledge and to create an allyship with the community. At the end of this video, we have a list of contacts that you may connect with to assist with building relationships to self-advocates and other agencies that support individuals with IDD. There are many resources online that can support you with creating an inclusive event to ensure that individuals with all needs and abilities may participate and be engaged with your office. You have a huge responsibility to ensure everyone is represented in civic life. Remember, the disability rights motto is nothing about us without us.